The sun hung low over the plains, spilling molten gold across the horizon and setting the dust aglow in a halo of amber. The cabin sat quietly at the edge of a sparse grove, its logs weathered and cracked, smelling faintly of pine and years left to the wind. A lone horse grazed nearby, its reins loosely tied to a post, while the soft creak of a windmill turned lazily in the distance. Inside, the air was warmer, filled with the faint, comforting aroma of freshly laundered clothes. Steam rose in delicate ribbons from the iron, curling and dancing like spirits freed from some long-forgotten memory. Emily, 24, stood with her sleeves rolled high, her hands steady as they pressed over the fabric. Her long dark hair was pulled into a loose braid that fell over her shoulder, yet one rebellious strand brushed against her cheek, softening the strictness of her posture. She moved with quiet precision, but beneath the calmness, a pulse of solitude hummed, threading through each motion. Every crease she smoothed, every fold she made, seemed to echo the patience with which she had carried herself through her years of loss. Her gaze occasionally lifted toward the window, where the light caught the gentle curve of her profile, illuminating a beauty not just in face, but in endurance. Outside, Luke stood silently, boots sinking slightly into the soft soil as he watched her. 34, with a life spent under relentless sun and wind, he bore the hardened marks of a man who had seen too much and spoken too little. His coat, black and crisp, contrasted sharply with the dusty, sun-bleached world around him, and yet his posture was relaxed, as though even the weight of his solitude had learned to bend. His eyes, dark and patient, traced Emily's movements with an attention that made the small cabin seem more alive than it had in years. He did not call her name, nor did he step forward immediately. He lingered in the shade, like a shadow drawn to light, feeling the quiet pull of something that had waited far too long to be named. He thought of the endless nights riding through towns that smelled of gunpowder and unwashed leather, of saloons filled with laughter that never reached his ears. He recalled the loneliness of being in crowds, yet feeling wholly unseen. Yet here, before him, in the simple ritualized act of ironing clothes, was a presence that spoke to him in a language older than words, one that demanded no explanations or performances. Emily, unaware, carried herself with a strength that was gentle, resilient, and infinitely human. Luke felt his chest tighten in recognition, a slow swell of something unfamiliar and tender. Finally he moved, boots crunching softly on the porch boards. She looked up, startled, and for a moment their eyes met, hers wide and cautious, his steady and quietly compelling. He cleared his throat, though the sound was soft, almost swallowed by the stillness of the afternoon. "I thought I might find you here," he said, voice low, almost lost in the warmth of the room. "The cabin's still, it feels like it's waiting for something," she replied, words gentle, yet carrying the weight of her own solitude. There was a pause, a stretch of air that allowed both to breathe and observe. The sunlight shifted, catching the curve of her cheekbone and the delicate movement of her hands. Luke noticed the slight tremor in her fingers as she set the iron down, an almost imperceptible flicker of vulnerability. He felt a surge of protectiveness, an instinct born not from possession, but from reverence. Here was someone who had known grief and carried it without complaint, someone whose quiet resilience deserved acknowledgement, and not pity. He stepped closer, the movement deliberate yet careful, as if each inch carried the risk of shattering a delicate moment. She did not step back. Instead, her gaze softened, curiosity and caution mingling in a way that made him think of sunlight through glass, soft, fragmented, illuminating yet fragile. They spoke of small things first, the wind, the horse, the creaking of a cabin floor. But beneath the surface of mundane words, something deeper stirred. Shared attentiveness, the unspoken acknowledgement that this moment, though simple, was uncommon and precious. Luke's mind wandered back to what he had heard of Emily's past, of the man she had loved and lost. He had heard tales filtered through the narrow views of townsfolk, who saw only a widow, someone marked by tragedy. Yet here she stood, alive, unbroken, each movement a quiet testament to her courage. He saw not sorrow but bravery, not vulnerability, but strength forged by circumstance. He remembered his own long rides across empty plains, the hollow nights that had taught him to trust only himself. And yet, in her presence, he felt a new pull, a tentative hope, a recognition that his solitude might no longer be a prison but a bridge. A sudden gust rattled the cabin, sending a loose board clattering against the wall. Instinctively, Luke stepped forward, steadying it with his hand. In doing so, his palm brushed against Emily's, and a jolt passed through both of them, electric and undeniable. Neither pulled away, and in that fleeting contact lay an understanding neither had spoken. A silence stretched, thick with possibility, as though the cabin itself had paused to witness the stirring of hearts long practiced in caution. The steam from the iron curled upward, tracing their forms in delicate mist, an ethereal witness to the quiet eruption of unacknowledged feelings. He spoke then, words breaking the tension not with ceremony, but with honesty. "I've ridden through endless plains," he said, voice low, carrying the weight of years of solitude, "but I never found what I was looking for, until I saw you ironing in this cabin. I can't pretend any longer. I need you to know." The words, simple yet profound, seemed to hang in the air, settling like the dust motes that caught the last slanting rays of sun. Emily's eyes glistened, tears welling with the force of emotions long restrained. She had been cautious, protective of the quiet she had built for herself. Yet in his gaze she saw reflection rather than judgment, understanding rather than expectation. It was not the feverish rush of sudden love, but the steady illumination of recognition. Here was someone who saw her, truly saw her, in the entirety of her being. She reached out, her hand covering his, grounding the confession in tangible warmth. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence was not emptiness, but presence, rich with the resonance of shared vulnerability. Luke felt the tension of years release, the ache of isolation softening into something expansive and uncontainable. Emily felt a liberation of her own, the quiet pride and grief of her past softened by the acknowledgement of her worth and the possibility of companionship. They remained like that, hand in hand, in the golden hush of late afternoon, the cabin breathing around them, the dust swirling like fleeting memories, finally given permission to rest. Outside, the wind continued its lazy course, carrying the distant sound of a dog barking and the far-off creak of a wagon over the plains. But inside, the world had narrowed to the space between them, a world dense with warmth and light and quiet understanding. Every detail mattered. The subtle lines in Luke's face that spoke of endurance, the gentle strength in Emily's fingers as they lingered on his hand, the steam from the iron rising like a promise. They had not spoken of tomorrow, nor of the uncertainties that lay beyond the horizon. Yet in that moment, each felt the anchoring pull of possibility, of a life no longer solitary, but shared. As the sun sank lower, painting the cabin in hues of rose and amber, Emily allowed herself a small, tremulous smile. It was not a smile born of naivety, but of acknowledgement. She had been seen, and that recognition had touched something tender within her. Luke mirrored the gesture, a quiet, unforced smile that carried gratitude, relief, and something more profound. The beginning of a love patient enough to grow slowly, strong enough to endure the unspoken trials ahead. They stood there, hands entwined, the last rays of sunlight catching in Emily's braid and highlighting the worn lines of Luke's weathered coat. The moment stretched, full of calm, full of heat, full of promise. There was no rush, no grandiose declarations beyond what had already been said, for their hearts had spoken in the most intimate language of all, presence, attention, and reverence. The cabin door framed them as twilight descended, dust motes drifting like tiny stars in the fading light. In that stillness, Luke's voice broke the quiet once more, softer now, as though sharing a sacred secret with the world itself. "You are more than I imagined, more than I ever dared hope for." Emily's eyes shimmered, a tear tracing a path down her cheek, and she whispered, not to him, but to herself, "I've been waiting to be seen." Outside, the plains stretched endlessly, vast and untamed, yet here was a place of stillness, of warmth, of connection. And as the wind carried the last hints of day over the hills, the two of them remained, side by side, not as lonely souls, but as companions who had found each other in the quiet, slow bloom of understanding. They had met in routine, in a moment ordinary to any observer, yet extraordinary in its intimacy. It was here, in the simplicity of shared silence, that the heart's deepest longings found a voice. And in that voice, clear and unwavering, Luke finally breathed a truth that had taken years to surface. "I don't just admire you, Emily. I love you." The confession hung between them, luminous and undeniable, like the last streak of sunset burning across the horizon. Her hand squeezed his, and her lips curved into a smile that was a release, an acceptance, and a promise all at once. The cabin, the wind, the dust, the iron clothes, they were all witnesses to a love that had been waiting, patiently, for the courage to speak. The moment held, and with it, the quiet assurance that whatever storms might come, they had each other, and that was more than enough. The plains whispered around them, carrying tales of hardship and endurance, yet inside the cabin, there was only warmth, light, and a love realized. As night descended and the first stars appeared in the sprawling sky, they lingered, entwined, two souls who had finally found the solace of being truly seen. And somewhere beyond the cabin, the wind sang softly, echoing a truth as old as the plains themselves. Love does not always arrive with fanfare, but when it comes with patience and reverence, it is the most profound force of all.